never talked about someday. I know we'll work it out, maybe if we put it off, we won't have to try so hard. All I ever wanted was this. Some say our hearts are full of wine, drunk off the touch of a kiss. I saw the moon in your eyes. Mrs. Mister, why you wanna fool me? I don't wanna play anymore. I wanted to be Mrs. Mister. What did we fall for? And this is crazy. I know that you're gone, but I've been told to find the right one, find the right one. I wanted to be Mrs. Mister. I'm the one you wanted. I'm the one you wanted. Mrs. Mister, why you wanna fool me? I don't wanna play anymore. I wanted to be Mrs. Mister. What did we fall for? And this is crazy. I know that you're gone, but I've been told to find the right one, find the right one. I wanted to be Mrs. Mister. I'm the one you wanted. 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 I'm the one. I'm the one.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Today we're going over a topic that I myself, this is my major interest in biology, but what we're going to be talking about today, let me switch to my window, make sure that the stream is, okay, the stream is good. Today we're going to be talking about invasive species. And I brought this up quite a bit. All right, I've talked about it a lot, mostly because my publications on invasive species are hanging up in the classroom. So I wanted to really go over kind of what this is. And we're going to start, rather than me actually going through definition, we're going to start with a picture. So this is a vine called kudzu. This picture was taken in Tennessee. So this is a vine called kudzu. And underneath this kind of carpet of plants, there are other trees. You can see some of the trees up here. There's rocks and other things like that. And this is an invasive vine. So this is an example of what happens when you introduce a new species into an ecosystem. All right. So I usually start off by showing this picture and then kind of talking like, why would it end up like this? Like, what would be the things that would kind of lead in to this being a thing? One of the major things that I always kind of bring up is what eats this? What natural predators does it have? What herbivores go after it? What other plants compete with it in its ecosystem? And when you start to look at all of those different things, you realize that, okay, animals that are native to the US might not necessarily eat it because it might be toxic to them. It might not be palatable, or it might not taste good. It might like irritate their stomach a little bit. So there's a lot of different things that can result in it ending up like this. The growth rate on this vine is extremely fast. And this is this is an extreme example, and not all examples are this bad, but there are a few that really are. So kudzu was originally introduced in the 1800s in New Orleans. And the reason that it was introduced is because cows and things like that eat it. It grows extremely fast and animals eat it, which means instead of buying hay to feed your animals, you could just plant kudzu. The cows just start going to town on it. And then the next day it's already regrown kind of a big portion of what's been consumed. And then that's less investment as a farmer. Then The Dust Bowl happened in the early 1900s in the South, and the issue is when you don't have a lot of plants covering the ground, you can end up with soil erosion. So what's a solution to that? Well, plant something like kudzu. It doesn't require a whole lot of resources, and it can grow extremely fast. It'll cover the landscape and reduce soil erosion. And so a common name for kudzu is the vine that ate the South. All right. And this is an extreme example. All right. This is an extreme example. Like I said, it's not the common case, but it does happen. Going back to paint. So what is an invasive species? An invasive species is a species that has been introduced by humans where introduced by humans where it didn't evolve. All right. So let's think back a little bit to coevolution. All right, when we talked about how there was a flower, and the pollen was at the very bottom of it. You have a little bit of pollen at the bottom, and then you have to have a moth stand by for this awesome moth drawing. So you have a moth. Look at that, nailed it. And there's its head. A little antenna sticking up. And it has to have a tongue that's capable of reaching all the way down at the very, very bottom of this in order to get to the nectar, right? This is coevolution. This, let me find a color. Red. This plant would not exist without this moth, and this moth would not exist without this plant. They need each other, right? So what would happen if you remove the plant or you remove the moth? Or what happens if you put the moth in a new ecosystem? So this is where you kind of have this interaction. Looking at predator-prey interactions. Why are there no such thing as slow gazelles? Well, it's because all the lions are fast. Well, why is there no such thing as a slow lion? Well, it's because all the gazelles are fast. So when you disrupt that process by introducing a new species or by putting a species there that hasn't been there before, you change the dynamic of how that ecosystem has always functioned. And that's what an invasive species is. It's at a place it didn't evolve, and it has to be human introduction. All right, it has to be human introduction. And that can either be intentional or unintentional. All right. A common one that's brought up is like if you go to different areas, like to go hiking and stuff, sometimes you'll see these like U-shaped things on the ground with brushes in it, and that's to clean your boots off. Why? Because seeds can stick to your boot. There have been reports of insects that end up on shipping containers. And we'll go over a couple of these. So an invasive species is any species that's introduced by humans to an ecosystem that it didn't evolve. All right. And the by humans is a major key component in this. If it ends up in an area where it didn't evolve at, and it was like, let's say, transported by birds or anything like that, that's just natural movement, and it's not considered to be an invasive or an introduced species. So going on to the second picture, here's some examples. So you have purple loosestrife, which is a pretty common plant. You see it quite a bit. Zebra mussels, anyone that's been up to the Great Lake has seen zebra mussels. I don't remember how purple loosestrife was introduced. Zebra mussels is an example. Zebra mussels were, let me pull up maps or Google Maps. Let me make sure my address isn't on it and pull up a satellite view. All right. So what happens is you have ships that leave out in the northern part of Russia. What they do is they will, as they're leaving port, ships have what are called ballast tanks. And ballast tanks are, where's a good picture? So this is what one looks like on the inside of it with a guy that's in here painting it. It's kind of a really low, here's a good one. What happens is they actually fill with water. So why would you want to fill a ship with water? Well, as it sinks down into the water a little bit, it will it gives the ship more stability, so it's able to kind of cross a lot better. It used to be rocks and sand. Now we do it by drawing in water. So here you can see the marine life gets drawn in, and then as the ship moves on, it will discharge its ballast. So ships drew in ballast water to cross the ocean. Then they go to enter the St. Lawrence Riverway. And the St. Lawrence Riverway, as you can guess, isn't exactly the deepest waterway. So what do? As you start to come in, you discharge your ballast water, and then the ship kind of makes its way in. Now, as it makes its way in to the Great Lakes, remember that it's not just going to be, it's not going to discharge 100% of its water. It's going to discharge most of it, but there's still going to be stuff stuck in it. And then as it gets back into the Great Lakes, as most people know, the Great Lakes are known for storms. They will draw water back in. And then as it makes its way through, and a lot of times it'll make its way over into Lake Michigan, it'll start to discharge its ballast water. And because of that, it eventually discharged zebra mussels. Those zebra mussels have no natural predators, and they are able to outcompete natural mussels, and they ended up covering this object here. So why is it visible on this object? Well, the tide has dropped down low enough that it's able to reveal this object where zebra mussels have accumulated on it. Shipwreck diving is really common. I'm a diver. Shipwreck diving in the Great Lakes is extremely common, and you can see zebra mussels everywhere. Common buckthorn. This is really common in the northern Chicago area. It's a invasive plant. It gives off these kind of like dark blue, purple berries. I apologize for the background noise. My neighbor decided that at 9/11 on a Wednesday that it's time to do yard work. So common buckthorn is really common in northern Illinois area. I'm not sure if it's in Indiana. If I had to guess, maybe, but definitely it's one of those things that it is in northern Illinois. Garlic mustard is one that I did research on myself when I was getting my undergrad. Let me see if I have the article on my yeah. So here's an article that I wrote in 2015. I did the research a lot earlier than 2015. I did the research in 2012. The summer of 2012 was when I did the research on this. But so there were kind of two parts of this where it was I did a lot of the demographic information of measuring where garlic mustard was, its densities and things like that, and then I did it with Daniel, and then another guy ended up doing a lot of the research on the arthropods. So what we were trying to do is see if garlic mustard influenced the density of leaf litter arthropods, since garlic mustard gives off or has chemicals and a mycorrhizal fungi. It's a fungus that it forms a symbiosis with that's toxic to other plants, and a common way to see it is that or it's toxic to other mycorrhizal fungi of native trees, and it'll cause them to drop leaves early. So we were kind of wondering, like, okay, since garlic mustard causes these trees to drop their leaves prematurely, does that actually lead to an increase in leaf litter arthropod density? So I did a lot of research on garlic mustard. It has kind of a deltoid shaped leaf. If you take the leaf and you crush it up and smell it, so an easy way to do that is to take the leaf, roll it up, rub it against a rock, or kind of ball the leaf up, rub it against a rock, and then smell it. That way it kind of breaks into the leaf, and if it smells like garlic, then it's garlic mustard. Emerald ash borer is a common or is an insect that my master's advisor, Jordan Marshall, the third person that was on that paper, he does a lot of research over. This is a beetle that was introduced from Asia. It is a secondary stressor to ash trees so Manchurian ash is a secondary stressor. But it's a lot smaller than what it appears on here. It's about the size of like your thumbnail, like the width of your thumbnail. That's about how big it is. So it's very tiny. And what it does is it crawls onto a ash tree where it lays its eggs on the bark. Those larvae bore into the tree, hence the name borer, bore into the tree, and it starts to eat, or it starts to feed on the phloem, and it causes these kind of runs right here. So here's one that's been feeding. This is called a feeding gallery. So this is what you're looking for whenever you look at trees. So here's the EAB is emerald ash borer. Here's the larvae, and then here's the feeding gallery, or the tunnels that are underneath the bark. And what this does is, if it goes all the way around the tree, it stops nutrients from moving up and down the tree. And so you can see the initial hole that it burrowed into. And then there's a size comparison to a penny. But it kind of burrows in or tunnels into there and feeds on it and causes a lot of issues. And it eats or it goes after a lot of the ash trees here and infests them. And then once the larvae have fed, it crawls up to the very top of the tree. Because it has such large eyes, it's visual, so it sees other ash trees, and it will fly to those other ash trees. It'll mate, and then the female will crawl down and then lay its larvae on the bark again, kind of repeating the cycle. The 4 common ash trees in the US, so some of them aren't common, is black, blue, white, and green. Green and white are showing to be somewhat resistant. Blue is pretty resistant to it. Black is not. All black ash trees that get it are dying. And that's the thing, is that black ash has a major cultural significance to Native Americans, where they use the bark and the wood in order to build baskets and things like that for their culture. So that is a major cultural item that it's going to be missing. And then the European starling. Again, I don't really research birds, so I don't really know much about the European starling, other than it's a bird. You can tell it's a bird because of the way that it is. So we're going to look at a case study. So the easiest way to kind of understand that is to look at case study. So if we were to look at what is kudzu of the aquatic world, the answer is Asian carp, and it actually flies like an airplane like this. I'm just kidding. That's photoshopped onto there. So they were introduced in the 1970s, and the numbers have rocketed up. They eat quite a bit, and they reproduce extremely rapidly. They are 95% of all the biomass in Mississippi and Illinois rivers. So that has led to a lot of international lawsuits about waterway access between the US and Canada. Why? Because this fish isn't in all the watersheds yet. So it's an example of what can happen when it gets a new foothold in a place. So where does this, reading kind of from my notes, where did this story begin? Asian carp, which is not a single species, but a group of related species, was introduced in, like I said, the 1970s. They were imported by fisheries and sewage treatment plants because carp have the ability to filter feed and get rid of excess plankton that can result from sewage. So when excess sewage is discharged into the water, it can cause algal blooms. Some of those fish escaped captivity. So it was an intentional introduction and an unintentional escape. By the 1980s, they'd colonized the Mississippi water basin, which includes the Illinois and the Mississippi rivers. They're big eaters. They reproduce fast. They outcompete native fish. That's a big one, is they can outcompete the native fish. And so like black carp eat mollusks and snails, which limits their availability for native fish and damaging shellfish populations. Another one, the silver carp, they eat plankton, which is a major food source for other fish species like larval and juvenile stages. We had talked about marine food chains earlier on in the class. they can be eaten, but they do contain bones in them. And so they're generally not a desired food in most parts of the US. And if you go fishing, you can actually get hit by them. There's a really funny video that you can look up on YouTube that they're like boating down, and this one person is like taking a selfie, and all of a sudden this fish just comes up and like bops her right in the face. Those are Asian carp. They get frightened at the sound of stuff underwater, especially like motorboats, and they fly out of the water and can end up impacting people. So Great Lakes and the salmon that are in the Great Lakes are threatened, and the trout that are in there are threatened by Asian carp. They've already colonized rivers and canals that lead into Lake Michigan and a major water supply linking the Great Lakes and to the Mississippi River. To keep carp from leaving the canal, electric barriers have been used to discourage migration, and the threat is serious enough that some channels that connect Chicago and Lake Michigan up to parts of Canada have actually been permanently cut off because we don't know what's going to happen if they end up there. So they're actually more of a problem than zebra mussels, which I showed a picture of earlier, and they could ultimately destroy a lot of the freshwater fisheries that are there. That being said, there is no evidence that says that an invasive species has caused the extinction of another species. So Asian carp shows how population and community ecology and fishery management and politics and project or ecosystem projects, all of that intersect with ecology and show the importance of how major human food supply chains in the U.S. economy, how all of that kind of links together. All right. This is kind of getting a little bit into AP environmental science. I know it kind of shows, what could happen and what could possibly happen, but it is very, very interesting. A lot of the stuff behind it. So going back to another picture on Google Maps. So this is Eagle Marsh. I reference it a lot. I reference Eagle Marsh a lot in the stuff that I do. So this is in Fort Wayne. So here is Fort Wayne, and it's located just off of Ingle Road and Jefferson, where it comes together with a Boyd. Here's Lutheran Hospital. The River Greenway connects here. So this is the River Greenway that heads through here, Plex South, and then the Greenway kind of follows back here. And then it turns off here, and then it turns into a gravel trail here. So why am I bringing this up? I did research in this area. Now, I'm not an aquatic biologist, I'm a plant biologist. So why is this flooded? Well, the Grand McCulloch Ditch is the Continental Divide. So everything on the northern side of it drains into one waterway, and everything on this side drains into another watershed. Asian carp exists on one side. I want to say it's on this side. Asian carp exists, but not on this side. So what happened is that my research project, we'll kind of go into it. So the background of this is that Asian carp is on one side and not the other. And what had happened was that there was a major flood that happened in the early 2000s or the early 2010s. And they were afraid that if it connected the two waterways, that Asian carp would make its way over to the other watershed. So they ended up getting, they being Little River Wetland Project, which their office is over here somewhere. Little River Wetlands Project ended up getting some funds and a project through the Army Corps of Engineers to build a berm, which if you've been out to Eagle Marsh, you see a running trail that's right here. And so this running trail exists because they constructed a berm that if this area were to flood, it would have to flood a lot more in order for the water to kind of make its way over and for Asian carp to make that cross. So why did I do research out here? Well, this prairie was slated to be repurposed and flooded. And so one of the things that they wanted to know is that over here or is this area that was dredged, as in they dug soil out of this area in order to get it to flood for the project to make this a wetland. And what they did was they took a front end loader over here and they parked it right here, and they scooped up soil and they set it down right here. So you can see this mound is a high area. This dotted line is supposed to be a trail. You can see it's not 100% perfect for the map, but this area, there's one right here, there's another one right here, and then the last one is back in this area. Now, these mounds are filled with invasive species. There's Canada thistle, there is, I can't think of the name of it. It's got a purple flower. Oh, it's Canada thistle has a purple flower. There's all sorts of invasive species that are over here. One of the things that they wanted to do was they wanted to replace this, or they tried different management techniques. They tried mowing it and then replanting seeds with native plants. They tried adding in plugs. They tried doing drilling methods. They've tried everything in order to get native species to establish in this area. But there are native species over here. All right, there's native species in this area, but not over here. So what do we want to do? Well, the plan that we wanted was that we wanted to move this soil over to here and set it on top and see if that would control invasive species or if it would encourage native species to colonize. So the first thing I did was I went out and I surveyed these two mounds, and I surveyed the third and fourth, but the third and fourth were mostly native species. The fourth was actually a monoculture of bulrush, which is a native species. So there was no point in kind of recommending anything for the fourth mound. The third mound had quite a few natives, and it was actually dominated mostly by natives. And so our recommendation for that was to kind of leave it alone. There was a lot of like wild bergamot and goldenrod that were native goldenrods that were there. So we recommended that be left alone. Now, these two mounds were filled with invasive species. There was quite a few of them. So our recommendation was to focus on these two because we didn't know how much soil was going to be dumped onto it. So recommendation was mound 1, then mound 2, and then finally mound 3. So what I did was I removed plots of soil from over here. I took little sections of it, and I took 5 plots of soil. So the first one was intact, as in you just scoop up the tray. And why am I... Dropbox is the website I want to go to. It's so old, it's my Purdue login. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find all of this stuff because I actually have pictures of all of this. I know it's like you guys don't really care, but I find it super interesting, and because this is my my presentation, then I'm going over this. It's loading. Maybe. Let me F5. Okay. So these are the mounds highlighted on the map. And then this is the section of the prairie that we cut out. And, you know, you could see this is a winter photo because there's ice and there's no foliage. But we wanted to make sure that Asian carp couldn't cross it. So this is intact, which is where you just kind of cut a section and set it right into the greenhouse tray. And then we also did without organic, which is where I went through and kind of scraped off all the organic stuff. This is inverted. We called it invert to, you know, make it faster to write out, where you set it inside of there and then just flip it over. And this would be like a sod transfer. This would be a reverse sod transfer. We did mix, which is where we dumped it into this bucket. We mixed it all up and then we dumped it into a tray. And then we did mound mix, which is where we did 1/2 of a tray being being from this prairie and then the other half being from the mound, and then we mixed it up. So that would be if they tilled it in and did all of that. And then after that, they went back and they burned the area. So we collected a few more samples. We did all the other samples again, except without organic. Usually in class, I ask, why wouldn't we do without organic? And the response is because fire went through and removed that organic layer for us. But we did everything exactly the same. And then they kind of cut this little section of prairie, and then there's everything all piled up. As a reference for size, this pole right here is around, I want to say it's like 4.5 feet tall. So it's a little over 1.5 meters tall. And then the rest of it is kind of the results of that. So they end up moving this soil over and placed it over here onto these mound sections. All right, so we didn't put anything on mound 3 or mound 4. They just did 1 and 2. And then we went back the next year after they did that and did a survey. What all did we find? What all is there? What's going on? What exists? And we ended up finding that, yes, it was effective. It did actually reduce the number of invasive species, and it would have been similar to the mix where they just kind of piled it up, loaded it into dump trucks, moved it over, and then unloaded everything into here. So it was really cool process just to see and just to watch this whole thing, because it's, a lot of times when you do research, you think about people in a lab kind of doing pipetting and things, but it was nice to see this project kind of evolve, like step 1, step 2, step 3, and kind of make its way to the end. And then of course, like, yeah, the data analysis part of it can be kind of tedious and boring, but just this whole thing was super, super interesting. And this is why I love doing invasive species research or field research. And so we went back last summer. So depending on when you're watching this, it would have been the summer of 2019, and resurveyed these 2 mounds. We didn't make our way to the 3rd mound because we wanted to get a follow-up. We want to know what is left at this area, what's still here, what's going on. And so we went back and we've surveyed it. And while we don't have the results of it, it's been, what we're kind of seeing is that long term, it's not as effective as we thought it would be. That there's definitely some, the invasive species are starting to come back. A survey was done in 2017. I want to say it was in 2016 because it was when I left to go to University of South Dakota to work on my PhD. So there was a follow-up survey that was done, and then we did a survey last year in 2019. And I think we're planning on doing a survey again in a few years just to see kind of what's the progression of it. Yes, you can get 1-year results, but what you're really looking at is what happens over a longer period of time. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens on this map. So one of the things that a lot of people kind of ask is where I get a lot of my old historic maps from. One of the things that you can do with Google Earth, this is where I got a fair bit of my maps from. And so this is the same picture. Let me centralize north. This is the same picture. So here's that kind of Y-shaped waterway. This area is kind of dried out a little bit, but one of the things you can do is this button right here is your timeline, and you can actually go back and look. So this is 2014. This is the picture that I took over here was from 2014 because I did this research in 2014, 15, and 16. So this would have been the most up-to-date photo that I had. I actually started the stuff in April. You can get a picture in 2012, what it looked like. You get a picture in 2010. So you can see here that it is a prairie and there's no flooding here. You can see where the trail used to be. Go back to 2008 and you can see what it looked like. Go back to 2006 and it's farmland. This is the guy owned, like this was originally farmland, and you can see this. You can go back to 2005. Go back to 2002 and see that why did the farmer struggle with this? Well, because this is where the Grand McCulloch ditch was, and so he's getting constant flooding in his field. And then, go back to 2008. Satellite photos aren't as good as they used to be, but you could see that this is rows of agricultural land. You can also see how undeveloped this area has changed over time. So this is, this tends to be where I get a lot of like my old satellite imagery from. And another source is that you can go on to like the USGS website and get a lot of pictures from their historic photos of airplanes that would fly over and take pictures, and it actually has like the crosses on it to where you have to like line up the crosses to match up the images and things like that. But that's where I get a lot of my old historic photos, Google Earth Pro and things like that. But I know the number one thing that people always do is they go and find their house, and then they go back and look at historic photos of their house and what it looked like. And 1998 isn't really all that long ago. This is a 20-year span in these images. This is Google Earth Pro is a very powerful tool. It's called a GIS, and I did a lot of spatial ecology with it. It's kind of a side topic of this whole thing, but this is where I got a lot of my historic photos from. So another site that I worked on was called Arrowhead Prairie, which is located just off of Aboit Road, which I have to find. Aboit Road kind of makes like this Y shape. So you take Jefferson out to this road, and then you find it. There it is. And so this property, you can see looking spatially at it. Here were ponds that were dug using dredging. They dug it and then set all the stuff off to the sides. Those are those high points. This is the historic Grand McCulloch ditch, which would have connected over here. And a lot of that you could tell by going back and looking at a lot of historic photos. So it used to be agriculture. This used to be the guy's farm, and here's his rows of agricultural land. So you could see in 2003, it was agriculture. 2004, agriculture. 2006, 2007, agriculture. 2008, same thing. And then in 2010, that's when Little River Wetland Project got a hold of it. Notice it's starting to shift away from agriculture at this point. And then in 2014, this is the photo that I used for all of my stuff because this would have been the most up-to-date photo for me. And so now you can see that it is not row crop agriculture, but it still does have kind of those bands that are present in with agriculture. So Google Earth is really cool to play around with. You can get the app on your phone. I know obviously it's on Android. I'm pretty sure it's on iOS too, for those of you that use Android phones. But you can you could do a lot of stuff with Google Earth and all of those different tools. But this is kind of that was kind of a side comment on getting into invasive species. All right, so invasive species are any species that was introduced by humans, either intentional or unintentional, where it didn't evolve. All right, so that's kind of the summary. And there's a lot of different effects that it can have. Okay, so that's all I have. Assignments have been posted onto PowerSchool. There's notes on PowerSchool if you guys there's stuff on PowerSchool to look at. Make sure that you're telling everybody to check PowerSchool, do the assignments, make corrections on your tests, get all that stuff turned in. I've been grading that, putting the grades in. But that is pretty much all I have, and enjoy the rest of your week and the rest of your weekend, and I will see everybody on Monday. Have a good week.